What are the best songs from Psalm 14? I'm Daniel Mount, joined today by Levi Johnston, and we'll answer that question on today's episode of the Expository Songs podcast. We've each picked 5 of our favorite songs from this psalm, and we haven't compared notes. Levi, before we jump into going through our top 5, this is one of your favorite psalms. Why do you love this psalm?
Well, this is the one that starts off, the fool says in his heart, there is no God. And since I do apologetics type thing, and I'm really interested in that, this is one you'll hear a lot when someone's interacting with atheists, especially maybe an untrained apologetics type person. They're learning or something, or people just kind of use it just out of they know that verse. You'll hear the joke, all atheists have their own holiday. It's April 1st, April Fool's Day. But when you're dealing with an atheist, you don't really want to lead with interacting with that and with an insult, basically, an ad hominem. Yeah. And so, and then that whole idea, it says the fool says in his heart there is no God. That's really only skimming the surface, because the fool there, that word in Hebrew is Nabal, go back to David and Nabal, so that's the same word. That was the guy that rather than give David and his men supplies or food to eat, he acts all huffy about it, and that's kind of the sense of this whole word here. And so, in a way, a lot of people that act this way, and there are people who are functional atheists. I know a lot of people that are functional atheists. They live like there is no God. In fact, all of us act that way one way or another. You just go through life and, you just do whatever, and you don't really think about God in the moment. And so it all kind of points to that sin nature we all share. And so that's a really good support for this apologetic argument for everyone being under this curse of sin. And that's one of the reasons I like it.
Neat. So we've each picked 5 songs, and if you would, go ahead and start us off with your number 5 pick.
My first one was it was Psalm 14, Only Fools, and that was written by Randy Gordon, and it says on the album Trust, the Living Psalms from 2015, and that was a good slight paraphrase of the whole psalm, and it was good just to listen to while I was studying the Psalms, or this psalm in particular, and it'd be good for maybe the offertory or a special like that. It wasn't something that I could see our church doing, but it was just a good calm one to listen to, and so I liked it for that reason.
Yeah, I would say that this psalm, for my church context as well, has a below average number of settings that I think that would definitely work in my context. There are a couple, like my number 5 that I'm about to get into, that I think would make a decent offertory, like good to listen to, but would be a little hard to pull off singing congregationally. So mine is much like that. "O Savior Come," written by Jake Mentzel and Philip Moyer, recorded by My Soul Among Lions, who I had on for a podcast here a couple months ago. Yeah, it's a good conversation. Yeah. Songs that try to capture this whole psalm usually do it through one of 2 lenses. My take is, I was listening through other songs, not exclusively, but most of them will either start at verse 1 and look forwards, starting with "the fool said in his heart there's no God." That's like the locus or focus point of the song. Or start at verse 7, "Oh, that salvation would come out of Zion when the Lord brings back the captivity of his people," as the center of the song, and look backwards. And I think both of these approaches are good, and you can have good songs from each approach for congregational singing. And for congregations that want to sing the Psalms, it's probably helpful to consider having one from each perspective. Mm-hmm. Interestingly and helpfully, I think My Soul Among Lions has released 2 settings of this psalm, one that starts at verse 1 and looks forward, and then the other is more centered around verse 7 and then pulling back through the rest of the psalm. And spoiler alert, they're both in my top 5. I like the other one a little better, so it's a little higher up. But I think that the congregations of some of these podcast listeners could probably consider both songs.
I had that one as one of my honorable mentions, only because there were some that I liked a little bit more, and I thought maybe you would pick one of those. But just to your point, you've talked about them about probably every psalm you've done so far.
this. I haven't had them in my top 5 every
Yeah.
time, but they've consistently had a good enough song to at least been an honorable mention,
Well,
even if it wasn't a top
I'm a
5.
slow learner when it comes to getting into new sounds and stuff like that. And this was the one was like, okay, I see what Daniel's about now. And so
Okay.
okay, I'm a fan now. And this was the one that hit me with it.
Neat. It's not obvious on first listen, but what the connection is. But when I lived in North Carolina, I worked for a Southern Gospel and Bluegrass record company, and they actually have considerable influence from both of those. They do a lot of their songs, not necessarily these two as much, lean bluegrass folk, but they said in one of their podcasts, I didn't get into it in the interview I had with them, but they said in one of the podcasts they did a few years ago that Jody Killingsworth, their lead singer, actually sang Southern Gospel with his family growing up,
Yeah.
which is part of why they will often have some really good vocal harmonies. So even though for people like both of us who have some Southern Gospel in our background, even though the connection might not be immediately obvious on first listen, the more I listen to them, the more I'm like, there's some harmonies here that I can really relate to. And then the bluegrass approach to their songs. I mean, they're not doing Southern Gospel, but a lot of their songs are like more bluegrass instrumentally, and I can kind of relate to those too.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
What song did you have at number 4?
Number 4, I had Psalm 14 composed by David R. Erb. And
Okay,
that was the Cantica Sanctorum spiritual songs collection, and that gets my choral in here because I had to have a choral one, and
that's good.
it's a word for word setting of the KJV, and so I really liked it for that reason. It's sung in unison. It's in like I think it was B flat minor through all the verses, and then when you get to verse 7. They sing through verse 7, and they go back to verse 7 and sing it as a 3-part canon or around, so they'll do that. So even though it's unison all through there, you get to that final verse, which is more of your climax of the psalm, the happy part of the psalm, and they get into that canon, and I really like that. Not something our church could do, but I think this would be a really good one to use for memorization if you wanted to use a song to memorize Psalm 8, or Psalm 14. I'm sorry. This was one that was like, I could listen to that a few times and it's like, okay, I can memorize it now. So yeah, I like that one.
That's nice. Yeah, and I'm glad. I'm always happy when you bring in the choral side of things because I just don't have enough background in choral for my ear to be clearly this is a much better choral setting than the other. So it's really helpful to have someone who's like, within choral, this is a really good choral treatment. My number 4 was "Let Deliverance Come Out of Zion," Psalm 14 by Karl Kohlhase. Um, it's really unique among all of my top 5 picks from this psalm because of its musical approach. It's fun and energetic, and it's the only one that was even in my top 10 or 15 finalists that I would describe as fun and energetic. The song just doesn't really lend itself to that in most cases. This song is, I'd say, Messianic Jewish stylistically, more or less. And that style, in turn, other people might resonate with this description better, comes out of the Jewish klezmer, folk music of the 1800s, early 1900s that you see in Fiddler on the Roof.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so Fiddler on the Roof is klezmer music. If you know Fiddler on the Roof's music, that's klezmer, pretty with a little bit of Broadway mixed in. But the tradition and the more energetic stuff is klezmer. Now, Karl Kohlhase isn't himself a Messianic Jewish artist. I've had a few of his other songs in my top 5 throughout this series, and all of his other songs that I've had as my top picks have been in other styles, more liturgical. If I had to guess, maybe Lutheran. I'm not confident. I couldn't find online. But within the liturgical style of a chorus refrain and then a verse, but a verse done in the way you often see in those contexts. But this song has some of that, but it's in more Messianic Jewish style than most of his.
Yeah, I see that. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think we're up to your number 3.
Number 3. This was my earworm pick because driving down the road, not listening to it, it was still playing in the back of my head. So this was Psalm 14 by Ian White on his 1999 album. And this is more of a praise and worshipy one. It was a very catchy chorus, and the chorus is the last verse. And has this late '80s, early '90s mix of Southern gospel, praise and worship, CCM feel. That thing that blended together there. That the inspirational, I guess, the style.
Yeah.
And so I like that. And it reminded me of something like if you hear some late '80s Heaven Bound,
Yeah.
or there was a female, I think it was a quartet called Heirloom that had Tanya Goodman
Yeah.
before
Heard of
she
them.
was Tanya Goodman Sykes, I think.
Hmm.
And I can't remember who the other ones were. It had that feeling to it, and so I like that. And they repeated verse 7 a lot, and it, that was the catchiest part of it. And is only slightly paraphrased too through that, so I like that part of it.
Neat. My number 3 pick I was already talking about. It's The Fool Is Said in His Heart, Psalm 14, My Soul Among Lions. And I really don't need to spend any great deal of time on this one because I already said a lot of my thoughts connected to this one earlier. Um, this one has the beginning of the psalm as a starting point and then looks forward through the rest of the psalm. And it's I think this one actually would work perhaps even better than the other one
Hmm.
for congregational singing, especially among churches with two qualifications. There are churches that like modern hymns and are okay with something that's more on the energetic
Hmm.
side. Um, I don't think it would actually, this one might not work as well as some of the others in my immediate church context, which is a little more traditional with a few modern hymns. But I could definitely, I've been in churches where I think this one would work pretty
Hmm.
well. So I believe that brings us to your number 2.
My number 2 was The Fool Speaks in His Heart, and it was anonymous. Um, I there were on hymnary they had one. Uh, I think there was just one, just the one
Mhm.
sheet music for it. So I plugged it into MuseScore thing and tried to pluck it out there. And so I ended up. I'm not good at music theory, but I think it was in an E minor.
Okay.
So I can think I learned something because it was in G, but it definitely didn't sound like G. So I had to figure out that, E minor is a relative minor of G. So I learned something from this. So I like that. And I think the arranger must have been a bass singer because the bass part is just walking all over the place. And this looks like an older song. And this is something I think my choir would like to sing with because, you get that movement around. The other parts move a little bit, but not too complicatedly. And so, and then it was a good paraphrase and it was a nice just hymn composition. Just something simple and something that really got into the words of it.
I am pretty sure there isn't a recorded version of that one out there. And so I would say to that end, if your choir actually gave it a try and got it and liked it, did it a few times, so I got the hang of it. Um, if you had the ability to cell phone or camera on a tripod in the back, if you got a video of that and put it up on YouTube, I would happily link to that from the
Oh yeah.
Expository Songs website because probably a third or half of the people who use the database are people who can read music and are like worship leaders or church pianists looking for something for service. But probably at least half of the readership can't read music and will only really be able to appreciate a song if they can hear a recorded
Right.
version. And I will definitely, on hundreds, if not thousands of other cases, I'll definitely link to a version of a song just being sung in a congregational context in a church, if that's what we
Oh
have.
yeah.
And so if you do record that, I'd love to get a link if you happen to
Oh
record it.
cool. Yeah, that's a good thing to think now.
So my number 2 is also a hymn, although this one I do know the author of. It's "Oh That the Lord's Salvation" by Henry Francis Lyte. We know him probably best for writing the hymn "Abide with Me." But those of us who really love the hymns will also probably know "Praise My Soul, the King of Heaven" and "Jesus I My Cross Have Taken." So this hymn he wrote based primarily on the final verse of Psalm 7. Oh, that the salvation of Israel will come out of Zion. When the Lord brings back the captivity of his people, let Jacob rejoice and Israel be glad. And so he phrased this hymn as a prayer for the second coming, the restoration of Jerusalem, and the regathering of Israel, which I think is actually a suitable
Hmm.
that's a suitable take
Yeah.
on that from this verse. So I'll actually go through a couple of the verses because I have a comment on one of them specifically. The first verse is, "Oh, that the Lord's salvation were out of Zion come, to heal his ancient nation, to lead his outcasts home." Now, he wrote this hymn in 1834, so the second verse really kind of seems dated in a sense after 1946, um, and the return of some Jews to the Jewish homeland in Israel. So the verse 2 says, how long the holy city shall heathen feet profane? Return, O Lord, in pity, rebuild her walls again." So it's kind of a prayer for that which has kind of happened, but at the same time, it must be said that, there are people walking the streets of Jerusalem every day who reject Jesus as the Messiah, and there are other people who are fully atheists and agnostics who live in Jerusalem now. So there is definitely a sense in which there are still unbelieving feet walking the holy city
Yeah.
today. Um, which then he loops back in the closing verse, "Let Israel home returning her lost Messiah see, give oil of joy for mourning and bind thy church to thee." I think it's a really, like, there's the original melody is decent, and I could have given this a shout out in the retuned hymns section coming up too. But I thought the melody of this one's decent enough. I put it in my actual top 5, in part because it might be my favorite lyric of anything to come out of this psalm. It's just
Yeah.
a really sweet prayer, really simple, 4 simple verses, but it's really sweet.
Yeah. Yeah. That was one that was creeping on my honorable mentions. And I think I
Neat.
did Francis Lyte on the first one too. Is one that
Oh
I
yeah,
had picked. So yeah.
yeah. I think doing this series has led me to a greater appreciation of his hymn
Yeah.
writing. Diving into specific, okay, how is he treating this psalm in more detail has made me appreciate what he does even
Yeah.
more. I'm pretty sure it's not the first time I've given one of his a shout out here. So I believe this, if I'm correct, this would bring us to your number 1.
Yeah. So I've got Isaac Watts. He kind of shows up everywhere, and
Mm-hmm.
it's fools in their heart believe and say. And this is just a very traditional hymn style. It was easy to follow. Um, and this would be an easy one to present to a congregation. It's said on hymnary. It's the tune is Evan, and that's the same as I heard the voice of Jesus say, and blessed be the name,
Oh, yeah.
which I'm not 100% familiar with, but when I played the song, it was ringing very familiar. So I've heard it somewhere, and so that would be something I think easy to bring into a congregation. And then going back to my whole idea of how this psalm reveals the sin nature of everyone, uh, is the verses in it. So verse 1, 4, and 6, I had fools in their hearts believe and say that all religion's vain. There is no God that reigns on high or minds the affairs of men. By nature all are gone astray, their practice all the same. There's none that fears his maker's hand, there's none that loves his name. Such seeds of sin that bitter root in every heart are found, nor can they bear diviner fruit till grace refine the ground. So you got the redemption there at the end too. And that was the one. The words just like grabbed me from that, and I think it exposits the song really well as well, or the psalm as well.
Yeah, that is good. And Isaac Watts, it's almost like so predictable that I shout him. I didn't shout this one, although I definitely considered it. It was definitely a runner up. I just did a quick search, and I heard the voice of Jesus say, as far as that melody goes, was on a Gaither Homecoming video. So
Oh,
you may have heard it. I didn't dig deep enough to figure out which one, but it's like on YouTube
mm-hmm.
with clearly a Homecoming setting. So somewhere along the way you may
Yeah,
have heard it playing in a special somewhere or something like that.
yeah. So there you go.
All right, my number 1 is "Lord Protect Your People," Psalm 14 by Nathan Clark George. This is a song that's really calm, but it's like calm without being sleepy. It doesn't feel like it drags. It's just peaceful. And the chorus is focused on the psalm's last verse, so that the salvation of Israel will come out of Zion and so forth. And it frames the whole song around Jesus. It's a specific Jesus fulfillment of this passage. Jesus being the Lord's salvation coming from Zion's hill. And I think this one is actually a really good song for congregational singing. It's simple and approachable, but it's not so simple that it's boring or would be a challenge for a congregation from being too simple.
Yeah.
So I think we each have a few runners up, and we've already each mentioned a few of them.
Mm-hmm.
Did you have any other runners up that we haven't mentioned yet?
Well, I had Jamie Soule's Confession of a
Mm-hmm.
Fool. The intro music kind of reminded me of an early 2000s Martins, and that caught me first, and then I really like the words of that one as well.
He recorded a number of his psalm settings in the early 2000s. So like he's been at it
Yeah.
30, 40 years. So I could see the comparison because it was from that same era. Who knows? It might have even been some of the same studio
Yeah,
musicians. You just never know.
probably.
Yeah. Do you have any other runners up to shout out?
I also had Psalm 14, The Fool is Said by the Psalms Project. It's more of a
Okay.
praise and worshipy one, not a congregationally one, but it was a good paraphrase as well, a partial paraphrase.
I also had a Jamie Souls, but I think I had it was his other setting. It's The Fool Says by Jamie
Mm-hmm.
Souls. I had in my runners up, along with The Fool Psalm 14 by the Sheer Poets, and The Fool Says in His Heart by Common Psalter. And finally, so those three are more settings of the whole psalm. One that's just a passing reference. Keith and Kristen Getty had a song called The Lord is in His Holy Temple, which is more based out of Habakkuk 2 or 3. It's more pulls from that one, but there is a passing reference, to some of that phrasing. That there's a parallel passage in this
Yeah.
psalm. So, like, get to Habakkuk. If we were to do a series on Habakkuk, I'm probably shutting that one out there. It's more of a passing reference here, so I didn't put it in the top 5. But it's a really nice song.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I believe that brings us to our retuning challenge, which are lyrics that we really like that we think could use a new melody. Often older lyrics. And so I believe you have 2 and I have
Mm-hmm.
1. So if you don't mind, maybe you can kick us off.
My first one I picked was Sure Wicked Fools, Devoid of Shame by Francis Hopkinson. And it just had the lyrics, that's all it had. And it had this really evocative language of that sin nature, and corrupt and lewd their practice grows, all thoughts of virtue they resign. Their throats are open to devour the helpless poor, when in their power their mouths with curses filled with lies. I mean, that's just tasty.
That's vigorous.
That just
Yeah.
fills your mouth. I don't know how to explain that. It's just like you can chew
Hmm.
those words, and I just thought that was, and it didn't have a tune, so definitely needs retuned.
I agree. So I have one that's kind of an odd pick in one sense, because you had to get permission to put a new melody in this one. But this is The Fool Speaks in His Heart, which is from the 2016 Trinity Psalter of the Orthodox Presbyterian Church. And the melody is kind of a somewhat sad minor key melody, which works really well for the first few verses, but it feels really out of place to that minor key melody to sing their last verse, which is, "May help from Zion come, the Lord his captives bring, and Jacob's tribes will then rejoice and Israel gladly sing." When you're ending there, a really sad minor key melody just doesn't quite feel right. That said, this is under copyright, so there couldn't be a new melody without permission.
Yeah.
So somebody who wanted to write new melody would have to seek permission. But I also thought that of the strict versifications, the poetry on this one was really strong. I really liked how they stuck really closely to the wording of the psalm and also made it really poetic.
Mm.
And with the right melody, this lyric was so strong that with the right melody, it would have been a top 5 pick for me pretty easily. So it's kind of a stretch for the retuning challenge, because usually I'll mention something that's public domain that people can just write a melody to without permission. But this lyric was so good, I thought I'd mention it here.
Mm. And there are a few songs like that had, it was minor all the way throughout, and it's like if you would just take that last verse and major it up, and it would like make the song.
Yeah, definitely. And yeah, that was definitely not the only one that I came across either, but that was just the one to me that was most stark. Like, this is such a happy, rejoicing last verse.
Yeah.
Really jumped out. So I believe you have one more.
Yeah, my last one is "Vain Foolish Men Profanely Boast," and that's Martin Luther, and translated by Johann Jacobi. And this one, I think verse 5 kind of captured that elation of the last verse, And this is another one of my favorite verses. Oh, that the joyful day would come to change our mournful station, when God will bring his children home and finish our salvation. Then shall the tribes of Jacob sing, and Judah praise their Lord and King with lasting hallelujahs. Just another one that just, it's just...
Nobody, different hymn writers have different strengths. Nobody caught vigorous enthusiasm like Martin Luther did. He was so good at that, and that's perfect for what he did. So thank you so much for coming on the podcast, taking your time to prepare for this and record it. I really appreciate it.
Oh, absolutely. I enjoy being here and biting into these psalms and listening to the songs. You really have to concentrate on what the psalm says. So this is a good practice for anybody to do. And I just appreciate you having me.
Glad to do it. And to the listener, if you enjoyed this episode, please share it with a friend and subscribe to catch future episodes. You can also find past episodes in the free 78,000 entry Expository Songs searchable database at expositorysongs.com. Thank you for listening.